My name is Benton Stokes. I'm a former fundamentalist, post-evangelical worship leader, and songwriter. I enjoy wry Manhattans, roller coasters, and road trips, just not all at the same time.
I'm Elaine O'Rourke, and I'm a teacher, an author, and a spiritual coach. I was a philosophy professor and a liberal pastor in a couple of former lives, and these days, I love aha moments and not-so-dry martinis.
We have conversations about life and God with a queer perspective, over cocktails, like you. This is Cocktail Theology. So rum is where it's at. I just gotta say. Strawberry daiquiris. All right, so listeners, daiquiris. What do you think about daiquiris? Okay. Do you think of them as like ices with booze?
I'm sorry. I need to interrupt here because, as you know...
Yes.
This is the crazy piece of me right here. Like, I'm sure I have other crazy pieces I don't see, but I know I've got this one. And if our listeners don't believe it, they should go back and listen to the Truckee sessions where I rant about what a cocktail makes it.
Yes.
Right. So, strawberry daiquiri, I have a little problem with, even though this is gorgeous and I love the color and I'm sure it's marvelous. Carry on.
Yeah. So, daiquiris are a classic cocktail. They're not supposed to come out of an icy machine.
Oh, God, sorry.
And for this strawberry daiquiri, we used rum, we used sweetened lime, and we used real strawberries.
Yeah, fresh.
Yeah, really fresh. And you so kindly sugared the rim with this pretty purple sugar, which is great. It's very festive, and again, very summery, and very tasty.
It is very tasty. Mm-hmm. I appreciate that. I probably would have done something a little different with the sugary piece, but the color's pretty.
It is pretty.
So and we had really good strawberries, so that helps.
Really
a
good
lot.
Strawberries.
There was some straining involved, which I don't love, but it was good.
Quite a bit.
But very tasty.
Very tasty. And a true classic daiquiri is really just lime, sugar, and rum.
Okay, I feel better. Thank you.
We just added the strawberries because we had some beautiful strawberries and here we are.
It's funny about how little I'm a purist about when it comes to theology. But when it comes to cocktails, darn it. You know what it is? It's about words for me. It's about words. Call it something else and I'm fine. All right, I'm fine.
Yeah.
But I'm going to drink some more of this now.
Well, yeah, I think you should.
Okay.
I think you should. Tonight we're talking about stories. And, stories are powerful. I think maybe stories are one of the most powerful vehicles for getting any kind of message across we have. Jesus taught in stories, parables.
Mm-hmm.
Some of my favorite songs ever written are stories.
I'm thinking about Joni Mitchell right now.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead.
Great storytellers. There's so many great books and stories that have been handed down. I think of like stories that I grew up with as a kid, things my mom used to read to me or tell me, stories that have been passed down through generations even. And like I think about the power of words, like you just mentioned words, but the power of words being passed from generation to generation to generation. Yeah. When we think back to our ancestors before they had the printing press,
right,
and before people read, and before
literacy,
and before information could be disseminated the way that it is today.
It's so crazy.
It was all passed down,
right,
from your stories that your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents told you.
Right.
And then when you look at like the Hebrew scriptures, we're currently involved in a Bible study that's going through the book of Genesis right now.
Right.
And how these stories, we don't have the written account of like the original written account, if there is one,
there's no
written account.
Yeah, right.
There's not one that we can turn to
and
say, well, there it's written down. It's in this library filed under ancient awesome texts. I don't know. And some of these stories are myth and some of them are history, but you have Adam and Eve, you have Noah and the ark, then you have Abram becomes Abraham,
yes,
and then Isaac, and then Jacob, who becomes Israel.
Right.
And the Jacob and Esau story. And just some of these stories are so compelling.
Yes.
And they teach us things.
Yes.
They don't just teach us things about God, but they teach us things about ourselves.
For sure.
So stories are important and stories matter.
Yep.
I think in some ways today, our society is more disclosive than ever, and in some ways, our society is more secretive than ever.
Say more about that.
I think that people are quick to broadcast what they want to broadcast. We have plenty of ways to do that. Okay. We're doing it right now. Mm-hmm. So there are plenty of ways to do that.
Wait a minute. Are you saying that I'm not coming here as my full and authentic self, disclosive and completely?
I am not saying that.
Okay.
But people, often, particularly if you're like on Instagram or TikTok or whatever, they are projecting the life that they want you to know about.
Right. For sure.
And you can know what they had for breakfast. You can know who they're dating or who they just broke up with. You can know what music they're listening to, what movies they're watching, what books they're reading. You can know intimate details if they choose to share them.
Sure.
And I think we live in a time where it's easy to hide behind all of that. Of course. Right? You can broadcast the things that you want people to know. But it's also easier to not have authentic relationships with other people and actually share those things deeply. And so there are still great stories being written and told.
Yes.
But I think there are far fewer than there could be.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So what occurs to me is as we're reading Genesis and there's much talk in churches about story, the power of story, or why story matters. Our stories matter. And so when we dare to share our story, it makes a difference. Yeah. Because other people shared the same experience or similar experience, and they need to know how you got through it, or they need to know what you're dealing with, and it helps them deal with it too. When I was growing up in my little church, it had many faults, but one of the things that I remember fondly about it is like every fifth Sunday night, we would do a hymn sing and testimonies. And so people would shout out a hymn they wanted to sing, and if I was on the piano, I had to be ready to play it. And then we'd sing a song, and then the pastor would say, "Who has a testimony?" And somebody would stand up and they would talk about how good God had been that week. Or they would talk about, what happened to them when they were saved, or whatever happened in their life that they wanted to give praise to God for. They would do that, and then they'd sit down and we'd sing another song, and then somebody else would do it.
For sure.
And that's a sweet memory that I have. And I heard these stories from, lots of people with lots more life experience than I had, and just about how faithful God had been and how good God was and is. And there's power in those stories.
Yes.
And I think the thing that maybe is concerning to me today is the fact that we don't share our stories very much anymore.
Isn't that funny, given how prevalent the idea of storytelling is? So for those of you who don't know, the money making that happens for me is in a pretty large software company. And the language of storytelling is everywhere. If you want to get a promotion, you have to tell your story, so forth. If you want to sell something, you have to tell the story. It's all about storytelling. There's certain formerly evangelical writers I blame for this, but it's that idea, right? And I appreciate the piece underneath it, but it is something that I was taught to absolutely not do.
Wow. Yeah.
Right. My growing up, and I won't go into huge detail, notice, right? Is partly that kind of New England, you don't, if you're rich, you don't broadcast it. If you're whatever, you just don't broadcast it. You live your life, you try and connect and blah, blah, blah. But it's also if you feel as though there's a deep shame in your life, you either wallow in the story or you back up from talking about it.
Yeah.
So in my history, family stories were hinted at, but not retold. And I know this is true for a lot of people. I expect, and I don't know, I would love to hear from folks who were legally adopted, what their experience of story is, like how they see their stories. Because I think there's a similar texture to that, right? Particularly if you were adopted without connection, like a closed adoption.
Yeah.
But that sense of everything in your history is inherently suspect or trivial or shameful.
Yeah.
I believe, from what I've seen in many, many people, is that our memory is actually based on the stories we tell, not on our cognitive experience.
Wow. So it's not so much the facts of what happened, but how we experienced it.
How we tell ourselves.
How we tell ourselves
So
it happened.
Right.
Gotcha.
So if I'm looking outside our window right now and I can see a palm. And if I say to myself, yes, well, I repotted that palm. And I say that more than one time, I'm going to believe I repotted that palm. Even if I wasn't the one who repotted that palm.
Right.
And that's a kind of a negative image, but I think that there's something in the telling of a story over and over and over again, both in our psychology and in our way of being, that in formal academic language, it's reifies. It makes it kingly, true, so forth.
Okay.
Right? If you've been taught not to tell your story, maybe you grew up poor in an abusive family, or you were the one who wasn't, quote unquote, as bright as the other ones. I got told that a lot. Like I was not as smart as these particular great uncles who, whatever. We'll let that go for a minute. Anyway, but the stories we tell ourselves can determine how we see ourselves and how we behave in the world.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So that's just basic psychology stuff. I admit that I'm having the challenge as you're saying that. I think you're right. But I'm having the challenge of, but I don't like talking about myself. Like the amount I just told you, I feel really embarrassed and uncomfortable with. Right? But I do think that you're exactly right that being humble about it, not in the sense of diminishing, but just here it is incredibly helpful to people.
It's incredibly important.
So what might it mean at this point when following Jesus, actually any non-material faith at all, is difficult to grab hold of? What might it mean for us to really tell the story of our faith journey, or of our journey with God, or our journey with each other, whatever that means? What would that look like? Like, I loved that you were talking about, hearing the stories as you were a kid, but what would it look like for you to tell your story of faith at this point, or somebody else? I mean, you don't have to pick on you, but what does that look like now?
It's tricky. As I experience it, I'm only going to speak from my own experience with this. But first of all, I struggle with believing that anybody actually cares about my story.
Yes.
So why would I share it if they don't care enough to listen to it?
Yep.
And if I value it,
Yep,
and I put it out there to be listened to and no one listens, it's sort of like me writing the best song I've ever written in my whole life. And when I play it for an audience, I get crickets. Like nobody connects to it at all.
Rejection is terrifying.
Yes. And so I think a lot of it is fear of rejection, or fear of being misunderstood.
Or missed.
Or missed.
Not seen at all.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
I try to be appropriately disclosive. I work, I have a part-time job as a barista. And so I work with people who are much younger than I am. And sometimes they ask me questions and they want to know about my life. Other times I feel like I should speak up and share something that I know.
Right.
And that I don't just know it in my head, but I know it because I've experienced it. And most of the time when I do that, I feel like it's well received, because I'm really trying not to impose. And I think I probably am overly careful with how I bring this information, whatever it is I'm trying to say.
That's probably true.
But I think for me, I want people to know that it's coming from a place that is genuine and earnest, and like I'm not trying to brag, for instance, or I'm not trying to say my experience was so much worse than yours or whatever, right? I'm not trying to do any of those things. And so I think the most important thing for me is to communicate that.
Right.
That I'm not trying to preach at you.
Right.
But I want to share this because I think this might be useful, helpful.
Right.
Or it's just something that I feel led to talk about right now. Yeah.
That language of feel led is such spiritual language, as opposed to, hey, a synapse just fired and I feel the need to, I feel compelled. Yeah. So I'm really stupidly overeducated. And at various times I've been asked, why do you believe in this thing you can't see, and so forth? And I'm sure other people, I am not alone in this, right? This is my story, but it's everyone's story who has any faith in anything, including like the Cubs will win. I mean, it's the same, in some ways there's no difference.
Right.
And what I've said is, I believe because I have experienced God's presence. I know for a fact, and believe that I've experienced God's presence in various ways. And I can recite what they are, and people will say, well, how come it wasn't just blah, 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 blah? I'm like, because I know what blah, blah, blah feels like, and I know what this felt like, and it's not the same.
Yeah.
It's just different.
Yeah.
I think that saying that kind of thing, not argumentatively, not trying to prove any point, but just here is my experience, is important. I really personally value when Black folk, brown folk, other kinds of queer than I am folk, other kinds of oppressed, all the various things that I am not.
Yes, right.
I so appreciate when they share their experience. And it can have an agenda. I don't care. I mean, but I so appreciate being able to see through somebody else's eyes and experience somebody else's way of being in the world and what they experience in the world. It's so important.
Yes.
And I think that as a white, cisgendered woman, I devalue that for myself. Because, I'm privileged. I'm, all those things. Why would anybody, why would anybody care?
Why
and if so, but as you were talking about, I was thinking, okay, so I'm not the only white cisgendered woman in the world. To the chagrin of many people. So what would it look like if I told the truth of my story as matter-of-factly as I can, as passionately as I can at the same time?
Yeah.
Particularly how God and people who followed Jesus saved my life. What would that look like?
Wow, yeah.
Because they did.
Yeah. Yeah, listeners, tell us about your stories, or tell us your stories. Please. We would love to hear from you. Cocktailtheology.com is where we are. And honestly, I think now is as important a time as ever for us all to kind of speak up, and share what we know, share what we've experienced, what we've lived.
Yes.
Share the things about ourselves that we know other people would find interesting, important, even life-saving.
Yes.
Because
Agreed.
There's just not enough of that in the world right now.
Okay, I need to go write something. Thanks. Are you going to make more of whatever it was we were drinking, please? Because I need to go.
There'll be a lot more.
Okay. Praise God. Okay.
Till next time, friends.
Bye.
Funny how the view can change, how life just seems to rearrange itself, no matter what it was. I don't know how it goes, but look, moving on feels pretty good. Moving on feels pretty good.
If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a like and hit subscribe wherever you're listening right now. We welcome your comments, questions, and ideas for conversations and for cocktails. Please get in touch with us at our website, cocktailtheology.com. Cocktail Theology is a production of SFS. Our theme song is Moving On Feels Pretty Good, recorded by yours truly, Benton Stokes. You can find my music wherever you stream your favorite artists. Join us next Thursday for another new episode.